Chapter 15, Under Mary's Mantle. Devotion to Mary was the dominant note of Gabriel's sanctity. Even before he joined the Passionists, the spark of that fire was already kindled in his heart. Threatened with extinction amongst the gay distractions of his youth, it was preserved through the fidelity with which he daily knelt in prayer in the privacy of his room before his altar of Our Lady of Sorrows. Later, it burst into a consuming flame that burnt away all lesser loves, purified his soul, and made it fit for paradise. Father Norbert had no doubt on this point. In quotes, "This devotion was the outstanding characteristic of his life," he declared, and the source whence he derived all that was admirable in his spiritual life. End quotes. The fact is acknowledged by all. When petitioning the Holy See for Gabriel's canonization, Cardinal Parocchi was one of many who drew attention to it. In quotes, "Mary was the very soul of Gabriel's life," he wrote, "the source and patron of the sanctity which he attained, so much so that it may be truly said his devotion to the great Mother of God has scarcely been equaled even by any of the greatest saints." End quotes. Utilizing the opportunities offered him in the course of his daily life, Gabriel at first practiced devotion to Mary in a simple way. On entering or leaving his cell, he was faithful to the custom of saying a Hail Mary on his knees to salute his heavenly mother. When anyone knocked on his door, he answered with Ave Maria, the Passionist substitute for the conventional Come in. But this was not sufficient to satisfy his ardor, for soon he was adding many extra prayers and devotions. Before commencing study, he knelt to say 7 Hail Marys with outstretched arms, followed by a prayer to Our Lady of Sorrows. In quotes, "O most afflicted Mother, O virginal heart, all steeped in the wounds of thy Son." End quotes. That he said Mary's rosary daily may be taken as a matter of course, but it was only one of many. Seldom did he fail to fit in during the day the Rosary of the Seven Dolores, the Rosary of the Immaculate Conception, as well as the Stater Mater, and a visit to Our Lady's altar. "In fact," observed Father Norbert with some surprise, "I can never understand how he found time for them all without neglecting his other duties." End quotes. This, however, was but a prelude to still more. Soon Gabriel was besieging Father Norbert with additional requests. Every time he heard the clock strike, he saluted his queen by a Hail Mary. He wanted to do the same throughout the night, trusting to his guardian angel to waken him, but Father Norbert wisely forbade it. For his personal use, Gabriel compiled a Marian Calendar of the recurring feasts of Our Lady through the liturgical year. For the greater feasts, he made a special preparation by a triduum or a novena. This was not just a matter of a few extra prayers, but a real renewal of fervor, a regular private retreat. His daily tasks were performed with extra diligence and offered as a spiritual bouquet to Mary. A favorite feast was the Assumption of Our Lady, in honor of which he made a special sacrifice. Although very fond of fruit, for the 40 days before the Assumption, he refrained from taking any at table. He called this Our Lady's Lent, for he had learned the practice from the founder of the Passionists, who had introduced the custom into the congregation. Gabriel was never tired of speaking about Mary, the subject ever dearest to his heart. He cared little for scholastic subtles or abstruse distinctions with which theologians often qualify their praise of Mary. His own simple principle was clear and straightforward. If a pious opinion glorified Mary and was not contrary to revealed truth, he was prepared to defend it to the last. The words of St. Bernard were his guide and inspiration. "Let the name of Mary be ever on thy lips, always in thy heart." It is impossible to describe adequately the depth and tenderness of Gabriel's extraordinary devotion. In quotes, "God has made Our Lady great so that we may honor her," he said. "Since he has honored her so much, why should we not do so too? In this way we also glorify God. If we are generous with her, she will be equally generous with us." End quotes. At times he feared he might be guilty of presumption, so convinced was he that through Mary's intercession his soul would find salvation. Reasoning it out with himself, he felt no other conclusion was possible. In quotes, "Mary has obtained for me so many other less important graces," he said. "Can I possibly doubt that she will obtain for me the most important of all and carry me off to paradise? With her help, I try to be faithful to all my duties. She will get me into heaven. I can't doubt it." End quotes. Perhaps the easiest way to convey Gabriel's absorbing love for Mary is to let him speak for himself through his letters. In tender, touching words, with a direct simplicity that pierces the heart, Gabriel rises to heights of eloquence once launched on his favorite topic. In a letter to his father, dated December 27, 1860, his thoughts return to 2 main themes, love of Mary and his soul's salvation. In his mind, the two were so closely interwoven as to be inseparable. As usual, he gently remonstrates with his anxious father, then suddenly his thoughts take flight and soar to new heights of tenderness. His ascent is the authentic ascent of the saints. In quotes, "Oh, Father dear, please don't always be so anxious to have news about me. I have a mother who loves me dearly, no matter how unworthy I may be, and who takes good care of me. Oh, Father, if only we could trust this tender mother of ours a little more." Well does she remember the pain and sorrow with which she brought us forth on Calvary. She preferred to see her dear Son die in torment, held to the cross by 3 nails, led like a lamb to the slaughter, rather than see our souls lost for all eternity. Oh, if only we would think of that sometimes. Perhaps we would love this dear tender mother a little more. We would trust her a little more. We would not fear the fires of hell so much. Then if we find ourselves troubled by its threatening fear, we would laugh at them a little more, saying, "If Mary be for me, who can prevail against me?" Oh, how peaceful would our sleep, how happy our days, what a paradise our life on earth, if we would utterly abandon ourselves into her hands, saying, "Into thy hands, O Lady, I commend my cause." If we have Mary, we have all. Without Mary, we have nothing. If Mary protects us, we shall be saved. If Mary abandons us, we are lost. It is not I who say these things, the saints say them. End quotes. A critical fellow student once observed to Gabriel that he was exaggerating the power of our Blessed Lady and exalting her too much, that he was fanatical in his devotion. With the courtly air of a medieval knight about to do battle for his lady, Gabriel bowed and smiled. In quotes, "In saying that, you do me too great an honor," he retorted. "What I have said is nothing compared with what could be said." End quotes. During his novitiate, or shortly afterwards, Gabriel had compiled an anthology in praise of Mary, usually called his Marian Creed. It might with better reason be called his Song of Mary. To read this litany of praise is to realize the depth and the extent, the intensity and all-embracing nature of his devotion. In selecting material, Gabriel employed but one criterion. If the statement glorified the power of Mary, he accepted it, no matter how debatable the implications might seem to an exacting theologian. Whence did Gabriel derive the idea? Undoubtedly, his Song of Mary owes its inspiration to the teaching and example of Father Norbert, himself remarkable for devotion to our Blessed Lady. Amongst Father Norbert's early writings is an extensive Mariology composed of more than 900 extracts in praise of Mary, selected from the Fathers of the Church, the Lives of the Saints, and similar sources. It is almost certain that during his tenure of office as Vice Master, Father Norbert used this compilation to stimulate Marian devotion amongst the novices, and it is at least probable that he passed it around among them to read or to copy. This was known to be his regular practice in later years. But if the original impetus came from Father Norbert, whence did Gabriel select his material? A careful scrutiny of the Song of Mary elicits the interesting fact that every single item can be found and identified in the well-known work of St. Alphonsus Liguori's The Glories of Mary. In quotes, "The precision of the references is so complete," observes Father Natal Cavazzi, "that it is not too difficult to trace the 148 quotations and to complete the 2 articles in the Marian Creed which the saint left unfinished." End quotes. In fact, apart from the insertion of the words "I believe" and a few conjunctive particles here and there, the entire text is taken bodily from the book of St. Alphonsus Liguori. To say this does not detract in any way from Gabriel's industry in compiling his litany of praise, nor does it take from the joy he found in thus looking to the glowing words of the saints to increase his own love for Mary. To seal his work, he wanted to make a final copy, which he proposed to carry inside his habit close to his heart. But this was to be a very special copy indeed. Bashfully, he came to Father Norbert with a request to make a copy of the whole MS in his own blood. In quotes, "But I wouldn't allow him to do so," said Father Norbert matter-of-factly, "and so it was written in ink." End quotes. The entire text is too long to include in full, but the following extracts will give an adequate idea of its form and content. In quotes, "I believe, O Mary, as thou didst reveal to Saint Bridget, that thou art Queen of Heaven, Mother of Mercy, the joy of the just, and the ways by which sinners may return to God. I believe that thou art the mother of all men, and that in the person of St. John thou didst receive all as thy children, according to the will of Jesus. I believe, as thou didst declare to St. Bridget, that thou art like a mother to all sinners who wish to amend their lives, and that thou dost intercede before the throne of God for the sinful soul, saying, 'Have mercy on me.' I believe that thou art our life, and as St. Augustine says, after God, the sole refuge of sinners. I believe that through thee we receive the great gift of final perseverance, that following thee I shall not wander, praying to thee I shall not fail, standing by thee I shall not fall, under thy protection I shall not fear, following thee I shall not weary, and by thy favor I shall come home to thee at last." Thou art the hope of all, especially of sinners. Thou art the city of refuge, especially for those who are bereft of all aid. I believe that thou dost hasten to help those who call on thee, that thou art the salvation of those who invoke thee, that thou art willing to do more for us than we want to do for ourselves. I believe, as thou didst reveal to St. Gertrude, that thou dost spread wide thy mantle to welcome those who have recourse to thee, and that angels hasten to protect thy clients from the fury of hell. Thou dost protect those who seek thee, and even if not asked, thou dost hasten to our aid. I believe, as thou didst tell St. Bridget, that when devils hear the name of Mary, they at once leave the soul. I confess with St. Jerome, Ephanus, Antony, and others, that thy name came down from heaven and was given to thee by divine direction. With St. Anthony of Padua, I believe that in thy name is that same sweetness to be found which St. Bernard found in the name of Jesus. Thy name, O Mary, is joy to the heart, honey to the lips, music to the ear. I believe that after the name of Jesus, there is no other name through which the faithful receive such grace, such hope, such consolation. And with St. Bonaventure, I confess that no one can devoutly invoke thy name without great spiritual profit. I believe that thy intercession is morally necessary for our salvation, and that all graces which God bestows upon us pass through thy hands. With St. Bonaventure, I believe that he who neglects thee will die in his sins, and that he who invokes thee, not in this life, will not enter the kingdom of God. I believe with St. Ephrem that devotion to thee is a pledge of salvation. With St. Anselm I believe that he for whom thou hast once prayed will not be accursed forever. I believe, as thou hast already revealed to St. Bridget, that thou art the mother of all the souls in purgatory, and that the punishments with which they suffer for the faults committed during life are in some way mitigated by your prayers. With St. Alphonsus, I affirm that those who show devotion to thee are happy and blessed, while St. Bernardine assures us that you show a special interest in freeing from the pains of purgatory those who have been your clients. Happy are thy devoted clients, because the gate of heaven will be opened to them. Thou art the portal of the heavenly Jerusalem, the blessed gate of heaven, the path to paradise. I believe that thou alone didst perfectly fulfill the precept, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God, that from the first moment of thy life thou didst surpass in love of God all men and all angels, and that from thy heart the very seraphim can learn how to love God. I believe that if all the love which mothers have for their children, all the love which married couples have for each other, all the love of the angels and saints for their devout clients was all united into one, it would not equal the love thou hast for one single soul. I believe that thou art the mother of holy hope, and the prototype of confidence in God. I believe that thou art exalted above all the angels and saints, and that thy perfection is such that God alone can know it. I believe that God has bestowed on thee, in the highest degree, all the graces and blessings, both general and particular, which he can confer on creatures. I believe that thy beauty surpasses the beauty of men and of angels." End quotes. To those of colder temperament who fail to make allowance for the warmth and the ardor of Italian piety, some of Gabriel's ideas may seem extravagant, even repugnant. He called himself, and was proud to be known, as the slave of Mary. On his person he wanted to carry some external indelible token that would mark him forever as Mary's property. He thought about it for some time, and then came to a decision. In response to what he deemed to be an inspired impulse, he hastened to the long-suffering Father Norbert for permission to brand the name of Mary on his breast with a red-hot iron. And to hear him talk, marveled the priest, you would have thought it was the easiest thing in the world. Of course, the proposition was simply unthinkable, but the refusal was gentle and sympathetic. Persistent as ever, Gabriel then suggested that he might perhaps be allowed to cut the name of Mary upon his flesh with a knife. A very small knife, he explained coaxingly. Even a penknife would do. This request was also refused, but to satisfy his ardent longing, he was allowed to paint the beloved name in colors and to renew the paint as often as he pleased. It may seem a curious thing to do, but at the same time it is undoubtedly a tender and touching little gesture that those in love would surely understand. Gabriel was so much in love with Our Lady that any lover's extravagance seemed to him quite normal. Long afterwards, Father Norbert musingly recalled his impression. After the beatification ceremony, a newspaper reporter tried to find something sensational to write about Gabriel. He asked Father Norbert, who had known him best. The sensational thing, said the old priest, was the simplicity of his life. But wasn't there ever any romantic episode, maybe some love affair? There was indeed, replied Father Norbert. Ah, said the reporter eagerly, his pencil posed for action. And what was the name of the little lady? She is known by many names, answered the priest, but the one that Gabriel liked best was the title, the Sorrowful Virgin. It was no more than the truth. For him, this was always the dearest of her titles, the subject of his constant thought, the center around which his whole life revolved. Once he asked whether he had made his meditation on heaven the usual subject for the Saturday meditation. "My heaven," he rejoiced, "is the sorrowful heart of my dear mother." It was a revealing phrase which threw a flood of light upon his habitual thought. Gabriel honored Mary as the Mother of God. He venerated her for the privileges which God had bestowed upon her. He grieved with her in her sorrows. He prayed to her for help in his difficulties, but he loved her with the simple, direct, uncomplicated love of a little child. In danger, he ran to her for shelter, in sorrow for consolation, in difficulty for guidance, in doubt for reassurance. And Mary responded by opening wide her mantle and taking him under her maternal protection. "Under Mary's mantle" was his favorite expression, reoccurring time and time again in his letters. It appears for the first time in a postscript to a letter from Morval in May 1857, in which he sends the family his good wishes for Pentecost, and as always recommends them all to Mary's loving protection. In quotes, "During these days may the Eternal Spirit descend upon you and all my brothers. May he impart to you the spirit of truth, the spirit of consolation, the spirit of peace, pledges of eternal salvation. And may Mary, Mother of Sorrows, ever kind and compassionate in our needs, reward and repay you abundantly for all the care you have lavished on our health and education. Let us hope one day to be found all together under the shelter of our loving Mother's mantle. If we have placed all our trust in her, we shall be safe." End quotes. In several subsequent letters, he returns to the same thought, almost to the identical expression of his thought. In quotes, "I have often said it before, on that fearful day of general judgment, I want to see us all together on the right side, under Mary's mantle. My only wish, after God's glory, is to see us all united in the awful day of judgment under Mary's mantle." End quotes. Amongst his resolutions, there is but one which deals with his love for his Heavenly Mother. At first sight, it might seem superfluous, but the wording is significant. In quotes, "I shall examine my conscience with regard to devotion to Mary. If I find I am growing cold, I shall strive to be more fervent in future." End quotes. He was not conscious of lack of effort, lack of sacrifice, but only of the possibility that his devotion lacked warmth. On the face of it, it seemed highly improbable, but Gabriel, being a saint, was never satisfied. He never made the mistake of confounding quantity with quality. Few and good, he used to remark of his prayers. In quotes, "One Hail Mary well said is worth more than 1,000 said badly." End quotes. Gabriel was Mary-minded to such a degree that she was never absent from his conscious stream of thought. When faced with an unusual difficult task, he breathed a short aspiration, "Mother mine, help me now." For he knew that she was ever near. On going out of the house, he stood for a minute by her picture, as if taking leave of her. On his return, he always paid a visit to her shrine to let her know that he was home again. Often he was overheard repeating the name of Mary over and over again, half to himself, half audibly, as if to savor the sweetness of hearing it for himself. Many of his sayings were preserved from oblivion by his companions, who years afterwards remembered not only his exact words, but the vibrant accent of his voice, the intense eagerness of his speech. Once, when some difficulty had arisen over which his fellow students were unduly anxious, Gabriel restored tranquillity with a few quiet words. "Trust in Our Lady," he said. "Let the Madonna look after it for us, and everything will be all right." A typical little incident was recalled by Brother Charles, who had arrived from Morval to take charge of the kitchen of Isola. In his spare time, Gabriel had made a small altar which Brother Charles installed in the kitchen, and upon which they placed a statue of the Blessed Virgin. Whenever Gabriel helped in the kitchen, he never left without inviting the brother to join him in saying a prayer to the Madonna. Side by side they knelt there, amidst the pots and pans, to say a Hail Mary and a few ejaculations. Oh, he had a wonderful devotion to the Madonna, Brother Charles wistfully remembered afterwards. On their country walks, the students usually dropped in to a wayside church. When they had paid a visit to the Blessed Sacrament, Gabriel always led the way to the altar of Our Lady. He had that true sensitivity to beauty that is the birthright of every Italian, and liked to see statues and pictures that were both expressive and devotional. He gave a practical reason for this, saying, "A good picture is a real treasure, because it can foster devotion, but poor pictures leave the heart cold and fail to awaken sentiments of piety." When he saw an artistic statue, he was loud in his approval. "Look," he cried, drawing his companion's attention. "Look at that! Isn't that beautiful?" On the other hand, in such a remote rural locality, the statue was sometimes a poor, insipid, mass-produced article, commercial church art, at its worst. In such a case, Gabriel was disgusted. "Oh, mother dear," he lamented, "how badly they've treated you! What a dreadful statue!" For spiritual reading, he preferred books on Our Blessed Lady, almost to exclusion of all others. The two he particularly favored were both well-known classics, The Glories of Mary by St. Alphonsus Liguori, and The Love of Mary by Dom Robert, a Camaldusian monk. Gabriel had the latter book almost off by heart. His copy was worn and tattered from constant use, but when he was dying, The Glories of Mary was his choice, and he often asked the infirmarian to read him a short passage. The familiar words soothed his spirit and supplied for the meditation he was no longer able to make. After reading those two books, said Father Bernard Mary, his heart was afire with love for the great Queen of Heaven. His mind appeared, as it were, transformed into Mary, so that he could no longer think or speak or act without having her present to his mind. To hear a sermon on Our Blessed Lady afforded him the keenest delight. He was also extremely pleased to hear any indirect mention of Our Lady in sermons on other subjects. Those who preached most eloquently on Mary were those whom he most admired. Eagerly he looked forward to the day when he too would be one of them. It was his ambition after ordination to be a preacher and a missionary, to become a special apostle of Mary, and to preach devotion to her 7 Dolores. From the start of his novitiate, Gabriel wanted to bind himself by a vow to undertake this apostolate. This special personal vow would complement his distinctive 4th vow to propagate devotion to the Passion. The permission he sought was not granted. As his profession day drew near, he renewed his request only to have it again refused. Repeatedly, he begged leave to bind himself thus to be Mary's knight and champion, but always the answer was negative. Finally, after 5 years of patient waiting and unswerving fidelity to his ideal, he was allowed to take a vow to spread devotion to the great Mother of God to the best of his ability. It was then 1861, too late, alas, for him to do very much in the few months of life that remained to him. But who would deny that his ideal found a great fulfillment after death than was possible to him in life? Nor was this vow sufficient to satisfy his ardent desire to honor Mary. He made an all-embracing promise never to refuse any requests made to him in Mary's name. Only he himself could tell the endless self-sacrifice required to keep it with fidelity. By his shining example, he became the acknowledged leader of his companions in showing devotion to Mary. May and October were for him months of special effort. But in fact the time or the season made little difference to Gabriel. All the year round a vase filled with fresh flowers stood before the altar of the Madonna. The students, indeed the whole community, knew who arranged the flowers with such tender care, so that the floral tribute came to be known as Frater Gabriel's vase. No matter what duties he shared with others, this was one item that he reserved for himself, his personal offering to his queen and mother. In the last letter of all, written to Michael only 2 months before his death, we find Gabriel's most beautiful tribute to Mary. So intent is he upon his task that it seems as if he had forgotten he was writing to his brother. His thoughts are all of Mary. Only towards the end does he recall his wandering pen and descend again to earth. In quotes, Michael dear, would you like to fall in love? Well then, love if you wish, but whom will you love? Love Mary. Who is more lovely and more lovable, more gracious and powerful? Don't think just because you cannot actually see her with your eyes that you'll grow tired of loving Mary, or speaking to her, or spending time with her. On the contrary, the joy and consolation are more pure and lasting, more pleasing to the heart, as much more so as the soul is above the body, the spirit above the flesh. Know well, furthermore, that no one in this world can make you truly happy. Most people are fickle or false in love, and if you do happen to find one who is true, the mere thought of having to part some day is a bitter torment to the heart. But that never happens to one who chooses Mary. She is loving, faithful, kind. She is never surpassed in love, but stays always above all. If you are in danger, she hastens to liberate you, in affliction, to console you, if sick, to comfort you, if in need, to succor you. She never minds what you were in the past. If she but sees a heart that wants to love her, she hastens to it, holds it to her merciful breast, embraces it, protects it, even stoops to serve it, accompanies it on this brief passage to eternity. Then, O brother mine, how comforting the thought, in that hour when, for those who have loved creatures, all must end in unutterable bitterness, when they must leave all and pass on to that eternal dwelling that each has built for himself. In that hour, I repeat, when with unspeakable sorrow, almost with despair, they cry out, O bitter cruel death, is it thus that you part me from my beloved? In that dread hour, true lovers of Mary are glad of heart. They invite death to draw near, and part in peace from their family and from the world. They know that they will soon possess in truth the object of their pure love, and that in her presence they will be forever happy. Perhaps this letter of mine will make you smile, but but I don't mind. I who have written it may be worthy only of ridicule, but at least I'd like you to know that what I've written comes from the bottom of my heart. My sole wish, after the glory of God, is to see us all united under Mary's mantle on that fearful day of the Last Judgment, even though we may be separated here below. Farewell, dear brother. Do not despise my words. Put into practice what I have said. It is a question of eternal happiness or eternal woe. At the time Gabriel wrote those words, he was dying. He knew there was no hope of recovery, and the end was not far off. In a sense, the letter can be taken as a fragment of autobiography. Whilst writing from the fullness of his heart of his own love of Mary, he was all unwittingly describing in detail his own happy and blissful death.